Assalamu alaikum. Uh, Welcome to our very first podcast at Islam for Europeans. I'm your host, Robert. We have a very special guest on for you today. We have brother William Halim Breiannis. Hope I pronounced that correctly. From Baltimore, Maryland, home of the my heated rivals, the Baltimore Ravens. Although William's not a huge football fan.
No.
But brother William wrote the book "Message to the White Man." Is that the correct? That's real correct title.
Message to the White Man in America,
Message to the
but
White Man.
it's fine.
Message to the White Man in America, which is available, I believe, on Amazon US. Is that correct, William?
Yeah, that is correct. And the ebook's available, I think, worldwide. It should be
Okay.
the ebook. So I don't see why they would put restrictions on that.
Yeah, no, it's available. Yeah, I mean, I tried getting it in Canada for now. We got to see if we can find a way to get it into Canada. The sister sent me the book. I have not received it yet. I wanted to be able to read, to give it a good read before having this interview, but I'll have to. I can't wait to dig into it and see what it's about. Like you said, I mean, there's even though this organization, can be seen as controversial by different stakeholders. I mean, as you said, we're just trying to, spread the message of Islam, to the Anglosphere, but for everybody really. And being from that, from that particular group, it should be our responsibility to, take this on. And and I think that's really what's been lacking, is this kind of the way we look at giving dawah in the West, and we'll get more into that later, inshallah. But did you specifically bring up these kinds of issues? I'm sure you did in your book, William. Did you talk about it like in passing, or is there a chapter that talks about the particularities of giving giving dawah to European peoples in the West? Or
Maybe in the introduction and the conclusion, this is mentioned,
yeah.
but it's not in the actual text of the book itself, because the book has a history. The book, Imam Mark Manley, he had put a Twitter up, a post up on Twitter some time ago. It's been, I guess well over 5 years, 6 years now. And he said, something to the effect that, when will the first African-American Muslim be brave enough to write a second edition of Message to the Black Man in America? And Message to the Black Man in America is, of course, Elijah Muhammad's work. It's for the Nation of Islam. And so he said, correcting it, the second edition, correcting it. And then he said, and when will the first white, or he might have said Caucasian, but white Muslim be brave enough to write the first edition of Message to the White Man in America? And I raised my hand, I said, I'll do it. And I really intended to make it satirical for the most part. Elijah Muhammad, he says some far out things in his book. He does. And, so I figured that I just take what he says and flip it on its head, correct anything he says wrong about Islam, instead of black people, right, white people, this type of thing. And then when I got into it and I learned more about the book and more about Elijah Muhammad himself, I realized that this isn't a laughing matter. And so, I mirrored his book. I actually had his book in my hand, or an e-copy of his book in my hand. I'd read a line and then I'd type the sentence in, my version. And then I'd read a line of his and type my version. And so I literally went line by line through his book, writing my own book, mirroring his. And when he talks about politics, I talk about politics. When he talks about deen, I talk about deen. When he talks about family or history or any of these matters, that's what I speak about. And I tried to keep my book the same exact length as his book, and mirroring it as much as I could.
Wow.
For a new audience, for a new message that is true Islam for a new audience. But the point that you raised about our role in giving da'wah, there's no doubt about this. There's really no doubt about this, that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he sent forth prophets from amongst the people to their own people. Why? Because they're the ones that can be related to the best. They know the culture, they know the language, they know their people. The people know them.
Mm.
And that's vitally important as well. It's not just that they know their people, it's also the people already know who they are.
Mm.
So that's one thing. And then also during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would send people to different lands, these people, they would have accompanying them someone from that land to bridge the cultural gap, to explain things. They wouldn't necessarily always be the teacher because they weren't qualified for that.
Yeah.
But they would accompany the teacher and they would assist the teacher to navigate that land. But the role of the teacher wasn't to lead those people, but to raise up from amongst them leaders. And this is the role, this is the sunnah, if you will, of the Khulafa Rashidin, is that when they would appoint an emir over a land, they would choose someone, if it was a believer in a position of authority, they would leave them in that position of authority. But if the person in a position of authority was a non-Muslim, then they would replace them. But generally speaking, they would leave the people to their own devices and just send in teachers to help them, guide them, purify them. And this has always been the sunnah. This has been the sunnah of the Muslims for the last 1400 years, to not go and take over a land, but rather to raise up leadership, raise up scholarship from amongst the people, and then leave the people to their Islam. And this is, we don't have that. We don't have that. And this is what we need. We have qualified scholarship, don't get me wrong. We could go down a whole list. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Dr. Omar Farouk, Sheikh Yahya Rodis. The list is long. There's actually a very long list of Amir Suhaib Webb. And this list is long whether we agree with the people or not, because there might be somebody that we don't agree with their points of view. But we're not talking about whether they're on the same page as us or not. We're talking about, they're qualified scholars. And that's the point that I'm making. We're not in a vacuum. We're not alone on an island. We have scholarship, we have viable leadership. But the problem is that people are still treating us as though we're a novelty, and that's really not the case. But when we're treated like we're a novelty, then we behave like a novelty. And
Yeah.
this is a huge problem. Is that, and I'll shut up in one moment. But this is a huge problem. Is that white converts to Islam, and in many cases, second generation Muslims, tend to have an inferiority complex, not about necessarily our Islam, but our place in Islam. And so it's a serious problem, because we are a minority within a minority. We're a fringe amongst a fringe, and we've lost our status as white people amongst many of our friends, relatives, communities, because now we're one of them. We're a Muslim. We're one of those people. And yet amongst the Muslims, we're still the man, whatever that might mean in a person's psyche. And so, because there, especially in the inner cities here in America, is that, white people are usually seen as being operatives of some sort or another. And so they're treated in such a way. And this isn't universal. I'm not, this is a broad brush I'm painting, but this is experienced by so many people that and someone could point to the very people I mentioned, these scholars that I mentioned, and say they don't feel that way. No, they don't, because they've reached a status in their deen where now they've reached, if we can use this term, a celebrity status in their deen, that now people flock to them instead of shunning them. But they're still seen as a novelty. They're still seen as a novelty.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you raised some really interesting points. I mean, historically speaking, a lot of the groups that used to absolutely despise Islam ended up, not only converting themselves en masse, but ended up, being the flag bearers of Islam in their own regions. And this is true. The quintessential example is the Quraysh themselves, who used to absolutely hate Islam. And if we look, I was I was listening to a lecture by what's the brother's name? Kamala Mecki, who talked about just one convert to Islam in sub-Saharan Africa, who was actually kicked out of his own tribe for trying to give dawah inside his own town. So he ended up making Hajj, not just because it was one of the pillars of Islam, but he wanted to know how he can give dawah to his people. And he spoke to some very knowledgeable ulama after he was finished with Hajj, and he inquired about what he could do about the people in his tribe. And they instructed him, set up a tent, miles away from your town, and write letters, invitation letters, dawah letters, to the people in your tribe, and ask them to come to your tent where you set up shop, and then you can teach people Islam there. So he did so, and maybe 5 to 10 men accepted the invitation and made the journey to where he was stationed, a couple, maybe several miles away. And he taught them not only about Islam, but how to hunt, how to fish, how to live, give them all the life skills. And then after about a year or so, he instructed these men, okay, go back, and I want you to bring one other person each who's interested in accepting Islam. So they did so, and then they did this rinse and repeat process. And soon he had to set up 5 tents and 10 tents. And then eventually he had about 1,000 men and women in where he had originally set up shop. And then after about 2 years of this, all the Muslims who had emigrated to where he was stationed went back to the city, and they couldn't threaten to kill them anymore. And eventually, the entire not just that tribe converted to Islam en masse, but also the regional tribes as well. So from one convert, it created this domino effect. So throughout history, we have these examples. It's just that applying these examples to the 21st century is very tricky, given the history between the 1300-year history between Islam and Europe and the West. And you're right, like the white converts who have achieved the celebrity status are still kind of seen as a novelty. So it's kind of counterintuitive that they've kind of become these white saviors. Whereas what we're suggesting is a very it's outside of the box in a way, but in another way, we're not pulling this idea out of thin air. I mean, this has been going on since history. The people who used to hate Islam, the people who did convert from that group, they would grow Islamic communities from the ground up. And then it just and they filtered their culture through an Islamic lens. So on paper, it sounds very accomplishable. I just think people's insecurities and their fears on both sides, really. I guess it makes people think that this is almost an impossible idea, when to the contrary, this has been going on throughout Islamic history.
This is the thing, is that the things you say, they bring out so much. So one of the things that's very important about the example that you brought about this sub-Saharan African convert to Islam is that he taught people life skills. It's important, because what we find a lot of times is that we want to deen. It's always deen, but we're not giving people practical application of life skills, right? And so nobody wants to, how to say this nicely, nobody wants to be proselytized, right? Nobody wants to be proselytized. But if you give them an example, if you give them something to benefit them, that's what they want, right? So people will come to you because you're a good guy, you're a good example, you're good at this, you're good at that. You have something to offer them. And then they leave with your Islam. They leave with your Islam. And that's an organic approach. But to set out on a mission to proselytize, as an example, to proselytize the West, this is a very uphill battle. It's like basically two rams clashing heads. and it doesn't work that way. And so what we have to do is be more of shepherds than another ram clashing heads with somebody. And this is one of the big problems with Islam in European history, is that what arrived to us of Islam as Europeans, what arrived to us is what the clergy told us and what the rulers told us. What I mean by that is what the enemies of Islam told us about Islam. And so now the people who actually convert to Islam, many of them are like, wow, I didn't know that. I never heard that. I heard something different. And once they hear the pure message, how many people enter Islam and they say, I always believed what Islam had to say, but I never heard it taught to me that way. You know, and that's the thing, is that we have something that people want. A lot of things. This is a natural. It's a fitri. Yani it's a primordial nature of man, but it's not delivered in an organic way. And I think that that's a stumbling block for many people. I think that another issue is what is da'wah. Right? So this is a huge problem, because a lot of times people think of da'wah as setting up a tent or setting up a booth or setting up an open house in a masjid. But real da'wah comes across the kitchen table. It comes across the lunch counter. It comes across, when you're buying something from the store on a regular basis and people get to know you, or when you're selling something at the store for that matter, or your coworker. I talked to a friend of mine, an ex-coworker of mine from Jamaica. I'll just look at him, smile from time to time. I'll say, what, you're not a Muslim yet? Well, why not? Right? And that enters the conversation. That starts the conversation. And so, I say it jokingly, but it opens the conversation. And I think that that's what's important, is that we have to get out of this mindset that da'wah is proselytizing, or da'wah is preaching to people, and just have organic relationships with people, because that's where people people learn more about your Islam from interacting with you than you trying to preach to them, honestly. And so we have to fix our mindset of what da'wah is to begin with.
Okay. Well, I want to, those are all great points. And I think that, we need to really absorb what you're saying here and apply it in a practical way. Now, what we've been discussing around in the group, and, I think this particular point is kind of it brings up kind of a controversy. Or the knee-jerk reaction is from the Muslim community is to not accept the idea, and that is the idea of a third space. Now, when we look at, I'll give you an example of the city I used to live in, Chatham. It was a boarding school for a Dar ul Ulum. So the mosque was 99% South Asian. All of the men wore, like the gutra and the thobe and the kufi. Women were almost never there, and when they were all in black niqab, and it's in this smack dab in the middle of a rural area that's like 99% white. So the cultures and the food is extremely hot as well. To add on top of that, I mean, I loved going there. I love the hot food. I love the ruafsa, but it's just not compatible. And when you talk to a lot of Muslims living in the West, a lot of them don't feel comfortable giving dawah to white people. Like you said, there's often an inferiority complex. There are language and cultural barriers. And, like on top of that, let's be honest, many, white people, have negative or misconceptions about Islam. But, and
and negative opinions of the immigrants who set up camp and in their communities, and don't interact with them, don't speak to them, don't assist them, park on their lawns, right? All of these things that they do, it's in many ways the behavior of the Muslims themselves is antithetical to the da'wah effort. And so that plays a large part in it as well. Sorry, I just want to add that it's not just, and this is a big thing, is that a lot of the white people are not against Islam. They're against the behavior of Muslims. That's something that has to be understood, is that they don't even know Islam. What they know is the misbehavior that they see from the Muslims. I remember, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, but during Ramadan, Muslims love to block people's driveways. And somebody came out and said, if you don't move the car, I'll call the cops. And the Muslim cussed them out. And it's like, dude, this is Ramadan. You're doing an injustice. And now these people just want to be, they want you to right the wrong. And instead you're adding insult to injury. These are the types of things that the people see. And this is what they're against. They're not against Islam. They don't even know Islam. They're against what the Muslims are doing.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, in those particular cases, I mean, we have instances where, Muslims, I don't think they understand the full effect of negative things they do, or what we call anti-Dawa, where they're not even just being neutral towards Dawa, but actually, being an impediment to teaching Islam. Like, and we can give examples of that. And, I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush, because I know, there are Muslims who do very good things. And, but at the same time, we have to be realistic about these things. I mean, how many converts feel comfortable bringing their non-Muslim family members to a mosque? Not just about thinking about what their relatives might say, but also, fearing about what, some crazy uncle will do when they get there. And this is an undeniable reality. And they can say that having a third space is going to divide the ummah all they want, but the fact of the matter is, us as converts, our entire families are not Muslim, and many of them have never interacted with Muslims, and many of them, even if they have a positive image of Islam, like my father did, I still took several years for him to come to a mosque, because it's just not their territory. And then you talked about the life skills, and how that's an important aspect of the deen. So why not a third space for these particular things? I mean, I think it's absolutely vital. And we're not saying that we want to be exclusive. I mean, when we take a look at even these so-called ethnic mosques, they don't disallow any Muslims from coming and praying there or fasting there. So they're not doing anything against Islam, but those mosques serve a particular function. It's just that what's needed on our end is simply not being met.
So if I may interject, there's one thing that I'll say right off the top, and then I'll feed off of what you were saying. The concept of a third space, right, is nice. The problem that I have with it is that oftentimes these spaces are used for what I've seen them used for is basically telling people, come as you are and we'll accept anything you do. And so you see girlfriends and boyfriends coming, or you see boyfriends and boyfriends coming, and you see girlfriends and girlfriends coming, and they're completely accepted and welcomed, and these types of things. And I know we have to deal with people where they are, but we also don't sugarcoat. And so what I'm saying here is that even in the third space, and this is why I'm saying anything about it, the third spaces still have to be governed by Islam as well. It doesn't mean that we kick people out or anything like that, but we encourage people to respect even the third space. People come in with their hair spiked, their earrings in, I'm talking about guys, of course, women, this is normal. But for guys to come in, looking like punk rockers or something like that, marhaban, you're more than welcome. Come, enjoy the meal with us, enjoy the conversation with us. And so this is what I'm saying, is that there still has to be boundaries set even in a third space. I say that, the reason that I'm saying all of this is simply because we've seen third spaces misused for the liberal agenda. And, we still have boundaries. I know you have something to say. Give me 1 minute, inshallah.
Take your time. Yeah.
Okay, so what I was going to say is that these third spaces, they're not new to Islam. We have the Rabat system, we have the Zawiya system, as the sister in the group mentioned, a tiki system or taki system. I don't know. It's Turkish. I've never heard of it until she mentioned it. But we have these systems even in the Indo-Pak community. They have the what is it, the khatib system, where the school is separate from the masjid, not here in the West, but in other lands. And then maybe they have a masala in the school, but the elementary school is separate, or that beginner school is separate from the masjid, because the children don't know how to clean themselves or behave. So this third space concept is not new to us. And one of the things that we see, going again back to that life skill, one of the things that we see historically is cafes being used as third spaces. And so you would have entertainment, maybe poetry or something like this being read. Slam sessions are modern, but and people would drink their coffee, they would drink their tea, they would have conversations, and then maybe a scholar would get up in the evening and give a short 10-minute talk or something like this. And these were enough for people to congregate, have that that we had spoken about before you started recording, having that companionship before, having that companionship to where they sharpened one another, where they helped one another, where they healed one another in a completely neutral setting. And it wasn't cultural per se. I mean, it was their culture, but it was still a third space. And we have to understand that there's subcultures even amongst well-founded cultures. In Morocco, you have subcultures of Moroccans. In Pakistan, I've never been to Pakistan, but I'm sure you do there as well. Every land has a subculture. And those people who feel that they're part of a subculture need places to go as well.
No, I think you're right. Absolutely. I mean, there needs to be guidelines. There's different options on how we can address this. You mentioned one of them is that this supposed third space. When we take a look at the cafe or the halal restaurant, these are third spaces where Muslims usually from a particular background meet, but also Muslims from all walks of life. As Muslims immigrate to the West, they're opening up restaurants based on their culture. So, one of the things we suggested on Twitter, and there was an African American sister who agreed with me, is that why not have a halal cafe? Where all the you have halal beef bacon and halal beef sausage, and all the menu items are halal, and they don't serve alcohol, but it looks and has the feel of a 1950s diner. And that way, people feel more comfortable in going to a place as opposed to, say, like your standard, shawarma joint or Pakistani restaurant. So that's one option. The other option, is if you have an actual third space that's an organization. So, for example, if I4E were to have a brick and mortar, structure, I don't think a mosque would be the best thing, because again, a lot of non-Muslims are even terrified.
That wouldn't be a third space.
You're right. I mean, if it's yeah, exactly. So like even that is, people are still reluctant to go in. So I think that it needs to address all of these issues where people can come into. I want to sort of go into something kind of related to this, and that is sort of convincing kind of our detractors who feel that this is not the time for white Muslims to collectivize in any sense, because they feel that there are issues that are much more important due to the fact that Muslims are quote unquote under threat. We see mosques being vandalized. We see MAGA protesters protesting at mosques, and people, their hijab, women having their hijabs ripped off on the street and things like that. Like, my counter argument to that would be that that's all the more reason, because at the end of the day, these people who are doing these things, these are our aunts, these are our uncles, these are our people that we grew up our entire lives. And even if I've never met those people before, if they're racist towards immigrants, like you know, if they were to ask any questions about Islam, we as an organization or as a, you know, a people would be their first point of contact. So how do you respond to those detractors who say that that this is not the time for us to contemplate having an organization or collectivization such as this?
There's two responses. One is to the examples that you gave, and then the other is the general answer. So the answer to the examples that you gave is that how can they be against any of these things if we're the ones that are standing in front of them? Make America great. Yeah, okay, I'm with you. Make America great again. You know, how can you be against Muslims if I'm amongst you? Right. And so this is important to understand. The vandalization of masajid, again, most often it's not about Islam. It's about their impression of Muslims. And so if we are their impression of Muslims, that disarms them. You know, and that's the thing, is take their ammo away from them with our faces. And that's important, right?
Oh, kind of breaking up on me,
He
William.
showed strength, and I don't care.
Oh, you're back. You're back.
Yeah. Hopefully it fixes.
Yeah. No, we're back.
Right.
We're good.
So it's good, because that's when I was about to put my foot in my mouth.
No, okay,
anyway,
that's perfect.
the thing is that when it comes to our women, and I'm just going to be blunt about this, is that if we're not defending our women, what kind of men are we, right? And I don't care where a person comes from, what their background is, I don't care. If we're not defending our women, what kind of men are we? And this is one of the first things that has always been done to enslave a people, is demasculate them or emasculate them. And the first way to do that is take away their ability to defend their women folk. And so it's important that it's important that people understand, if they harm a Muslim woman, there will be repercussions to that, right? This is important. But again, this, you know, like I said, I'll go off on a tangent on that, because that's something I'm passionate about. But what we'll talk about is the general response to people who are detractors to this idea. There's so many anecdotal examples that we could give of Moroccans establishing a Moroccan community center, or a Bosnian community center, or for example, you have what are they called? They're not masjids. Anyway, you have different subgroups establishing their own gathering points outside of the masjid, and sometimes right within the masjid. So if they're against us doing it, even Dar al-Ulum for that matter, you say that it's a learning center, but is it just a learning center, or is it also a propagation center for the Southeast culture? You know, Southeast Asian culture rather. So the reality is that, and this is my feelings towards it, based on my experiences and what I've seen, and the like. And so my point here is that anybody who says we shouldn't be thinking about this now, then my question to them is why? On what basis? Right? Why should we be silenced as a people? Right? When they're not being, they're doing it, they themselves are doing it. So why should they be doing it in our communities, but we're not allowed to do it? What sense does that make? What sense does it make for an Indo-Pak community to come to America, to the suburbs, to open up a center, right, and then tell us we don't have a right to do the same exact thing in our own communities? That doesn't make sense to me. Right. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is this, and I think that this speaks more to the matter, is that we see African Americans moving in the right direction. What we see is that they're recognizing that you have people who go to Saudi and elsewhere in the world, and they come back and they want to put their cultural identity, their worldview on the African American community. And so they're saying, no, the Sunnah, is that we raise up our own scholarship, we raise up our own leadership, and our community supports that leadership and scholarship, and in turn, that leadership and scholarship guides the community to become better and stronger. And we see this with the African American Muslim Conference that takes place every year. We see it with the African American Round Table, the Imams Round Table that takes place, I believe, every week. We see these things happening in their community, and it's right and it's good, right? So it's not less right and it's not less good for white converts or white first, second, third generation Muslims to aim for the same exact thing, right? And it's not divisive. To be divisive is to say, I'm not going to work with them, right? I'm not going to work with them. And I don't think, if anybody's saying I don't want to work with them, then I don't want to work with them, right? So the reality is that we're one ummah. And especially me coming from the inner city here in Baltimore, the fact of the matter is that there's no separation between me and any other community, right? But at the same time, that doesn't mean that my own people don't have a right to me. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so we have to keep in mind that, you know, we're not exclusionary, we're not segregationists, right? And so that has to be made very clear. Yeah. And for anybody who says anybody who says it's not the time, bring your dalil, you know, bring your proof. I can't accept that.
Yeah, I think like absolutely, this is very important for us to do. What's been the I want to ask you, what's been the reaction on both ends when you sort of bring up this idea? Because from what we've seen, most of our detractors have been other white converts.
That's
whereas
the only people who have ever said anything negative about my book, other than some people from the Nation of Islam, other than the Nation of Islam, the only people who have said anything negative at all about my book has been white people. Right? And most often it's because and let me be clear, I mean white converts to Islam. And a lot of times it's because they themselves feel uncomfortable in their own whiteness. They don't understand where they fit in. And that's my impression of it anyway. They might themselves feel, this isn't necessary or whatever the case. And I'm not saying it is necessary. My book, I mean, I'm not saying it is necessary. But the fact of the matter is that the only people that I have ever heard really being against it is white. In fact, all the African Americans, and again, I'm part of an African American community. My peers are all African American. My mentors are African American, and all of them have said, no, this is good, right? It's only I believe that it stems from a question of one's own identity. Where do I fit in? And there's fear there. There is fear there, and so they're uncomfortable with the conversation.
Well, a lot of white youth now, I keep thinking about, 2020, and we see sort of the kind of like the ending of Western civilization, which was caused due to many factors. I mean, we could, I don't know if you've read Rene Gonon's Crisis of the Modern World, but industrialization, did play a major role in that. But regardless, what was I going to say? A lot of white youths are going to be trying to kind of pulled into these unfortunately pulled into these kind of like either your civic nationalist MAGA type groups or even hardcore white nationalist groups, and it's going to lead them down a very destructive dark path that it's just going to be filled with anger and hate. And then you have the other extreme where they might join a group kind of like these woke leftist groups where it's destructive on the other end of the spectrum. But what we're suggesting is like there needs to be outreach and saying that you can be white and be Muslim and keep your own white American or white Canadian or Italian or French culture and still be connected to the greater Muslim community.
I think that what you just outlined is vitally important. The first thing is that I think that white non-Muslim youth would go towards the MAGA white supremacists, put it another way. I don't necessarily think those who say "Make America Great Again" are white supremacists. There's plenty of people who are Latino. Some of them are.
Yeah.
You know, I think that some of the white supremacists are part of that movement, but that movement's not white supremacist.
Many of them are really anti-Trump, though.
But this was what I was going to say, is that many non-Muslim white youth will go towards that white supremacy route because many people feel their identity itself is being threatened right now.
Yeah.
You know, they're being basically told that they don't have a right to speak because of the color of their skin. And they're told that, you know, their opinions don't matter because of the color of their skin. And they're told that they need to change because of the color of their skin. And that's going to have psychological backlash. Yeah. And so these white youth are going to rebel against that on one side. And then on the other side, you have, and this is where most white Muslim youth fall, is they fall into the Antifa crowd. They fall into this anarchist crowd that, you know, as you said, woke, you know, crowd, to where they get behind any movement that they perceive fights the system, even if they themselves are committing greater injustices or causing the spread of greater injustices. While what we're calling to is really the middle path. We're calling to Islam. We stand out for justice, but not at the extent of greater justices. And at the same time, we're saying, no, Allah created you the way He wanted you to be, and there's nothing wrong with that. Be you. And this is really the message. There's two messages. The first message is that you have to be the greatest you that you can be for the sake of Allah. And that is your birthright. Right? Islam is your birthright, and your only role is to be the greatest you can be for the sake of God. Right? That's the message. And if we can communicate that message to people, of course, with La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah at its foundation, you know, this is the message. And so that's the balanced middle path. And that's the way to protect all youth, not just white youth. But specifically in this trying time, per our conversation here, the white youth that can go this way or that way. And sadly, we see far too many of the Muslim youth across the board in the West going towards the Antifa liberal agenda bandwagon. And it's really, it's frightening for the future of the Ummah.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, what we're offering basically solves so many different grievances on all sides, really. You know, when we look at, you know, what nationalists, you know, what their grievances are, you know, it's basically destruction of the family. You know, we're not having kids anymore. Our birth rate is well below the 2.1 replacement rate. And Islam not only places an emphasis on having children, but strong families and really strong family ties as well with our extended family members. So that's one thing. Protection from, you know, degeneracy is another. Also, you know, a lot of them are afraid of non-whites, and they think that, you know, like, you know, that they are not going to fit in, that, you know, that they need to, you know, go out and do and have white flight into the suburbs and, you know, live in like gated communities where they don't interact with people who are not white because they're afraid of, you know, like if they're going to be attacked or not, which, you know, I live in Canada, so that seems like an over exaggeration to me, but in their eyes it does. But, you know, with Islam, we have, you know, our brothers and sisters who not only want us to keep our culture, but are willing to defend us, and we're willing to defend them. And, you know, as I stated before, you know, like a return to traditionalist culture, which is going to be interesting to see how that actually, you know, pans out. I mean, a lot of them say, you know, like there's not really a white culture. Well, I disagree. There are several different European cultures. I mean, white Canadians, you know, we have our own particular culture. And, you know, like once Islam filters, you know, through that lens, we're going to adapt even maybe new types of cuisine, new types of dress that will be, you know, catered to that. So, yeah, I mean, it all sounds really great on paper. It's just that, you know, it's just going to take, I think, a shift in consciousness from everybody to realize that what we've been trying in the West really hasn't been working very well, as we can see with France and other countries where Islamophobia is on the rise, but also that that this is a viable solution. So.
Really, I think that the most important things, and this is what da'wah is an invitation, right? But the most important thing is to really plant seeds. We can't we can't make a tree grow, but we can definitely plant a seed and nourish it. And that's our only job. That's our only job. I can't make a community agree with me. I can't, and maybe I'm wrong anyway. But the fact of the matter is that what we can do is we can plant seeds and nourish those seeds, and then leave that in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People who say that this won't work or anything like that, it depends on what scale they're thinking. So the fact is that 2020, if 2020 didn't teach us anything else, we know that this is a year that virtual communication has taken off. Virtual communities. And a lot of the conferences have been virtual. The Imam's Roundtable is virtual. And I go back to that because we have examples already. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, And so I think that to think that all white people should move to all white Muslims should move to one location. Well, this is, as funny as that sounds, is that, you have African Americans who speak of New Africa, and they want to take, for example, Georgia or the Carolinas or something like that in the United States, and make this all African American, encourage a migration of African Americans to this new Africa. And the thing is that there's plenty of issues with that. I won't get into that, but the main thing that I would say is that to think that I'll speak for myself, to think that I'm encouraging white Muslims to flock to one area. I'm not doing that because as you had mentioned, you and we're both white Muslims. We're both white converts to Islam, but we're not the same. We're not the same. Not only are we not the same, but our culture is not the same. And anybody who says there's no white culture, that's because many of them don't recognize that they are in the white culture. Right. They just recognize, well, this is how we are. Well, that's what a culture is, But the reality is that we're not all the same. And so brothers and sisters who are on the West Coast of the United States are not like those on the East Coast. And neither one is like those in the Midwest. Minnesota has its own Norwegian style culture there.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. They're their own people. They are their own people, And of course, there in Canada, you have the French Canadians and you have the Danish Canadian. No, but anyway, so you have these different cultures. So my thing is setting up our communities where we are, establishing the communities where we are through our da'wah efforts, and then networking, forming confederations, being in reach of one another. This is how we do things. I was invited to give a talk at a Shiite masjid on bridging the communities. And this is something that I'm very passionate about as well, is because this divide, we have to close the chasm, right? The chasm, we have to build bridges. We have to know that we're all Muslims at the end of the day, even if we don't agree with one another, right? But the point being is that they're not allowing anyone in the masjid. So the whole community gets online. We go on Zoom. I give the presentation on Zoom. People, feedback, and that's the community. That's how their community is operating right now. There's no reason why we can't make those moves, while setting up our own communities, doing our own efforts, putting in the work in our own communities. And that putting in the work is the key phrase, because we can't just expect miracles to fall down from the sky. We have to put in the work.
Right, exactly. Yeah, wonderful, absolutely. Yeah, so it definitely is feasible now that we live in an online world. We can now look at the ease at which we were able to create this podcast. I'm not very technically proficient at all, and yet by a push of a few buttons, we're able to have these online conversations that probably would have never occurred in this at this level. I mean, we look at social media. A lot of arguments occur on social media just because of it's just basically text on a screen. But when you add an audio layer to that, there's more of a connection because you're actually hearing the other person's voice. And when you add a video layer on top of that, it's definitely, you're connecting more with people at a virtual level, as opposed to just these kind of just arguments on social media.
It also adds intimacy.
Yeah,
We get
absolutely.
to know one another,
For sure, absolutely. And and it does seem, at the end of the day, nothing's going to compare to actually meeting these brothers and sisters in person. That's something that people were just used to just a year ago. But I guess now times has changed. So I mean, once eventually this becomes larger and larger, with these virtual kind of meetups, I guess it'll be all the more sweeter once we actually meet in like a face-to-face format. So yeah. Okay, so we talked about establish the issues surrounding third spaces. We talked about issues within the Anglosphere. We talked about the differences between cultural communities. So all very important things to bring up. I guess we'll bring up one more topic, and I hate to keep talking about our detractors, but I think it's important, because we want to address these issues. So I'll play the devil's advocate once more. One of the things that they say is that how do converts sort of keep their own culture when they're just basically our numbers are so incredibly it seems as if our numbers are so incredibly small, and that we end up just having to immerse ourselves in a totally different culture. And a lot of the times what will happen is they just often kind of just have no choice, really. You as a I remember when I first converted in 2003, when I went to the mosque there, I was basically the only white Canadian there, really. And I would go there every single week at the mosque, and I would be maybe just be me and one more person. And actually, I developed a very good relationship with that brother over the years, so we're still in contact, alhamdulillah. But it's almost, it just seems like it's insurmountable in the sense that Islam is a communal religion, and you want to be around the believers, you want to be around the Muslims, but it's becoming more and more difficult to do that, just because I just feel that it's difficult for us to connect with them in certain ways in terms of how we address things such as Islamophobia, because we're looking at it from a completely different angle. And I know we can criticize, some Muslims from the immigrant community for doing things that give a negative impression of Islam. But even if they're, if they have the best intentions at heart, we're coming from totally different kind of mindsets. I mean, many of them have no non-Muslim family members. Islamophobia to them is, the stranger on the street that they'll never meet again, and it could basically be anyone that they're, that they see on the street. They don't know what these people are at heart. So a lot of their mindset is, we need to combat against this by allying, politically with different groups. Whereas for us, we have a totally different situation, because our vested interest is all of our family is non-Muslim, and everything that we say and do has a direct impact, not just on their impression of Islam, but also, our lives as well. So, and then with the African American community, they're kind of like, I guess, in kind of in between a little bit, because they have an established sub community within United States. They, I think 18% of the of the Muslim community in the United States is African American, but they also have family members who are not Muslim as well. So they're kind of like in between. If you were to draw like a Venn diagram I guess they, like, I think that's why they kind of support this idea, just because they understand the situation more of Muslims in the West. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, and I have to pull it all together and put it into a question format. How do we move forward um, and have sort of like a dialogue between all of these different Muslim groups when we have other voices saying we shouldn't be divided at all, and this is completely divisive, and we should all just be one giant Muslim community, when that's clearly not the case. So how do we bring all these groups together and come to conclusions that will benefit everybody?
So I think that my first knee-jerk reaction to that is, that's not my job.
It's not my job either.
No, then that's my point. No,
Yeah.
that's exactly my point, is that that's not our job,
Yeah.
right? To bring everybody together is not our job.
Mm.
That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings hearts together. I can't make anyone like me or appreciate me, and I'm not going to chase people around to be my friend either, right?
Mm.
So I'm going to do my thing. And if they're cool with that, then cool. If not, then okay too, right? And this is one of the things that we have to understand, and this is one of the things that the Muslims in general have to understand, is we don't all have to agree, and we don't all have to get along. We have to respect one another. We have to help one another in good and not help one another in bad. We have to stand out for what is right and stand out against what is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have to be best buddies, right? And I think that that's important, is to try to get everybody to be on board is beyond our means.
Mm-hmm.
So you started out with one question and ended up with that question.
Sorry,
so no, it's okay. It's okay. I want to go back to the first question, and it was about our culture, right? And how to maintain our culture amidst being this minority, especially when a person is one person in the community or something like this, And so an example that I would give is that, I have my family coming over tonight for family dinner. And I have a wife, I have 9 children, and my daughter and my son-in-law and my grandson won't be coming tonight. But the other 8 of my children, as well as my daughter-in-law, my daughter-in-law is not Muslim. So I'll have my wife, I'll have 8 of my children, and my daughter-in-law will be here for dinner. But then I'll also have my sisters, and I'll also have my nephews here for dinner, who are not Muslim, right? And we'll sit at my table. I'll cook, I'll do whatever I do, We'll eat what I cook, if they like it, I hope, right? And we'll have good conversation as a family. And that's part of our culture. That's part of our culture. Now, if my sisters ever host a family dinner, we always have it at my house. But if my sisters ever did that, then they would not include things that I can't eat. They wouldn't have it on the table, because they respect us, right? They know who we are. They respect us in that capacity. So our culture, this is who we are. And if I invite a Pakistani or an African American or a Moroccan or Arab or whatever the case, if I invite them to my house, I'm not going to suddenly start cooking biryani, even though I like biryani. I'm not going to start cooking things ethnically for them. No, this is how we eat. This is what we're going to eat, And so to try to change who I am to appease someone else this is the problem that we have. Just be yourself, but be the best you that you can be for the sake of Allah. If there's 2 ayat that we need to cling to, and this should be our foundation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Kul inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alameen. Say, indeed, my prayer and my sacrifice, right? This is my work, my effort, my worship, all of this. And my living and my dying, my very being, who I am, my breath that I take, and when I cease taking breath, all of it is for God, right? The Lord of all the worlds. That's the first thing, is that who I am is who I am, but I'm me for God, right? And that's because I claim that I love God. That's why, because I claim that I love God. So we come to the second ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Qul in kuntum tuhibbuna Allahi fattabi'uni yuhibbukum Allah wa yaghfir lakum dhunubakum." Say, if you really love Allah, then follow me, follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah will love you and forgive you your sins. So we have to be who we are for the sake of God, but according to the Sunnah, the guiding principles, the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we create our own culture. We don't want music that's foul. Okay, let's keep our music, but clean it up some, right? Our clothes. We don't want tight clothes that show our shape. We don't want jeans that are going to show our thighs. That's our aura, right? So wear loose, baggy clothes. We don't want clothes that go down below our ankle. Bring them up to the top of the ankle. So we purify our culture, but we purify it in the lens of the Quran and Sunnah. But we don't, adopt. We don't go, as they say, we don't go native and take somebody else's culture. Your name's Robert, right? So my oldest son, his name's William. Right? He's a junior. His name's William. People say, well, what's his Muslim name? And I say, well, he is a Muslim. His name is William. Therefore, his Muslim name is William. And they're like, no. I said, you want to know what his Arab name is. But he's not an Arab. He doesn't have an Arabic name. Right? And this is important because to change the identity of something. Your father, I'm assuming your father or your mother named you. Right? Your family called you Robert all your life. Your cousins know you as Robert. Your siblings, your uncles, all these people know you as Robert. Your coworkers, your old schoolmates, your best friends you grew up with, you're Robert. And then all of a sudden you come around and say, no, I'm Abdul Hakim. What? No, dude, you're Robert, right? Yeah. I can't even pronounce Abdul Hakim. You want me to call you this, right? And so this taking on, this adopting of somebody else's culture in this way, it harms the da'wah effort, but it also harms us because now we have a split personality. So now when you go to the masjid and you bring a friend to the masjid, somebody says Robert, somebody says Abdul Hakim, and you're like, which one do I answer to? You don't even know how to introduce yourself, right? You're with a Muslim and you go meet somebody new and you're like, what do I say? Who am I?
Actually, when I first converted, I thought I had to take a Muslim name and ended up taking one because I thought I needed to. And then a week later, someone's like, no, you don't need to take a Muslim name. But the damage had already been done. Everyone was, always calling me Jibril for like years. And I had to, it took a long time for that to go away. But yeah, I think we're in a different situation though than our African American brothers, where they preferred it. A lot of them prefer to take on a Muslim name because that's part of their historical identity. But no, I definitely hear you out there. It's important to try to keep everything we can. It's just it's a bit of a struggle because we're the only we're going up against it. We're going up against it because we're one in 100 or 1,000 in the mosque. But I think over time, I think I think Muslim communities are starting to realize that when they bring new converts in, that this is something important.
There's two things I'll say. The first thing is that we have to reach out to our community and explain to them that it's important, and explain to them that we should be a bridge. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first thing that he did when he arrived in Medina was establish the masjid. Then he established the constitution. Then he established ikhwa between the muhajirun and the ansar, right? This brotherhood. And so there has to be a mentorship. There has to be a type of brotherhood. When somebody comes through the door and they want to enter Islam and they look like you, right? That the Indo-Pak brothers send them to you.
Yeah.
And you're their point of contact so that you can mentor them, guide them, answer them their questions, help them. And if you're not qualified, then the Indo-Paks need to bring you up to speed to help you become qualified so that you can relate to your own people and they can relate to you. That's important, right? That's important to have a point of contact like that. The second thing is that, again, you going back to what you said earlier about having a brick and mortar third space or organization, having an organization that's a point of contact if a white person wants to enter Islam and they're scared because they're white, they can reach out to these people.
Or even if it's at a negative, they might even not even be thinking about converting to Islam. Maybe their Islam is just, I mean, their opinions about Islam is like a negative 100. And our job is to bring it down to a negative 90. So, this convert, their niece or nephew who converted to Islam, or their son or daughter, can survive.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not,
and add to that, even the white Muslim who's been part of the community for 20 years, but feels like he's on the outside and feels unwanted, feels unloved. There's Muslims who go to the masjid and they feel more alone at the masjid than any other place, because they've never been accepted for who they are, right? They're accepted when they dress a certain way, or when they speak a certain way, or when they eat a certain way. But when they are who they are, they're not accepted. And so having a point of contact, if you will, for these people to actually just feel accepted is important. If we had that, I think more people would hold on to their own identity of who they are.
Yeah, and these are all wonderful points. I mean, thank you so much for participating in the podcast today, Brother William. I just want to make one final point in that I don't think that a lot of our brothers who come from an immigrant background are doing anything wrong in that regard per se. I think it's just it's important to for them to realize that a lot of these issues are simply like they're a grand scope that I don't think a lot of mosques are ready to take on, and like full fledged. Like you said, even just referring them to us would just like cut through so much red tape. I think a lot of mosques, when they wanted to help out converts, just converts in general, they originally went full out. They would spend all of their donated money on us, and then it would just fall apart. I mean, I remember they gave this one convert like a free Umrah trip within a month of becoming Muslim, and the guy didn't know any of the manasik of the Umrah, and the guy had just quit drinking alcohol, and after he came back from Umrah, like he just went back to drinking again, and he just felt so much shame because they gave him so much, but really they didn't give him a foundation. And I think they do want to help. I think a lot of them do want to. They would be enthralled to see European Muslim subcommunities convert en masse. It's just that they don't know how that would take place, or I think they just feel that the situation is so immovable. That they're kind of looking for like a different. I think they're starting to look for like, okay, we need to do a different strategy now because what we've been doing hasn't been working out.
On that note, and I can only speak from my own personal experiences on this matter. On that note, I see a lot of talking being done, but I don't see any efforts being done, because something as simple as asking. For example, myself, as a white Muslim in the community, and here I'm speaking about an Indo-Pak community, asking me, how do we reach out to the white community? What do you think would be a good idea to extend an invitation to our neighbors? Right? How any of these things, right? What could we do different to make it more inviting?
Not have it at the mosque.
So this is the thing, is that just reaching out and having these conversations, sincere conversations, would go a long way. But what we find is that they come with the understanding that we have Islam. And in a lot of cases, again, only speaking from my personal experience, and this is not 100% across the board, there are wonderful brothers and sisters from around the world, absolutely sincere. Even those who make mistakes are good. And I'm not, so anything that I say that's negative, this isn't putting anybody on blast. This is just making a statement. The fact of the matter is that they believe that they have Islam and the kuffar are the kuffar. Yeah. And so any problem that the kuffar has, it's about Islam. It's not because they're Muslims. It's not because of their behavior. It's not because of their attitude. It's not because of their da'wah efforts, right? It's because these people are kuffar, they're destined to be kuffar, and that's it. If they really wanted Islam, Allah would guide them. It's not, on us. It's not our fault. It's not our da'wah efforts. Why isn't it our da'wah efforts? It works in our country. Why isn't it working here?
Yeah.
Right? So this is, they come with the mindset. A lot of times what we see is that, and again, going to the Southeast Asian community, not because I'm attacking them per se, but because they're predominant here. They come and they set up small Pakistani communities, small Indian communities, small Bangladeshi communities, right, in the midst of the suburbs. And they bring a slice of home here, and they don't interact with their neighbors. And when they do, it's a hostile interaction rather than coming and actually interacting with the greater community, right? Actually becoming socialized into the society around them without adopting, the kufr, without adopting the bad behaviors, but actually interacting. And that's one of the reasons we see so many Muslim youth leaving the masjid, leaving the community. And this reminds me, I'm glad that I said this, because it brings me back to another point I want to mention in a moment. But because they see their parents go to work dressed like everyone else, come home dressed like shawal kameez or whatever the case might be, go to the masjid, and they're a completely different person. And the child sees that this is a type of a cognitive dissonance, and so they rebel against it, and they just choose a side. They just choose a side. But one of the things you was mentioning, third spaces. I personally, a friend of my family's, a dear friend to me. He has a son. His son is 18 years old, 19 years old now, somewhere around there. And he was studying to be a Hafiz of Quran. His son is a white American, raised on Islam, and he was one of my students in the masjid, mine amongst other people, of course. Straight A student, did great, and he was 3 juz away from becoming a Hafiz of Quran. 3 juz away from becoming a Hafiz of Quran. And he left Islam.
Wow.
He left Islam. And part of the reason he left Islam is because of the fact he was not accepted in the community. They would pick on him in the community. Now, some of the kids looked up to him because he was the straight A student. He won all the prizes, but he still got picked on. He still got made fun of. He went to a church where they absolutely accepted him.
Yeah.
And in that church, and this is why I wanted to bring this story up, in that church, they started teaching him how to apply for jobs. They started teaching him job training, communication skills, life skills, all of these things that he actually needed to be successful, while also teaching him his new faith, right? This goes back to what we were saying about teaching people practical everyday life skills. Where are our youth learning that?
Yeah.
Right? The third spaces could afford even technical training or trade training like this. So these are realities that if we're not accepting, if we're not accepting, meaning the greater community, or we're not being accepted by a greater community, then what we're going to see is our children are going to be leaving to go where they are accepted.
Yeah, I think part of it is they associate the greater Western society with, you need to be like this in order to fit in. And, it seems as, and in order for you to do that, it's antithetical to being Muslim, because they see the dichotomy. They see that, okay, when my parents are at the mosque, they're wearing the shalwar kameez, whereas opposed to, when I'm getting along in the greater society, I have to be, completely outside of that Muslim world. And this, what we see is a lot of Muslims on the conservative right, who are, rebelling against the West, who are saying, the West is full of decadence and there's nothing positive in it. And, I think the tipping point, a perfect example of how there's this backlash against Western society was Macron's his mention of a quote unquote French Islam. So when they think of a French Islam, they think of an Islam that's not French culturally, but watered down by liberalism. But what we're suggesting is, no, when we think of French Islam, we think of the indigenous French people converting to Islam and filtering the bad aspects out of their culture and having their own sub community. And I think if we were to apply that to different areas within the West, then it would ease a lot of this tension that people feel, that Muslims feel, that if I want to be Muslim, I have to reject Western society, or I have to go all out and completely, to quote unquote to immerse yourself in Western society is rejecting Islam altogether. And this dialectic is really driving a lot of people away from Islam, and what you gave was a perfect example. So to those enclaves of the South Asian communities, for example, living within their own culture on one block, in the suburbs, the most practical solution is, as you stated, helping those different cultural communities that you're living with, giving them a place.
Actually, I'm going to stop you and say, no, that's not the most appropriate thing for them to do. Okay. Right? The most appropriate thing for them to do is come under the leadership of the people of the land that they go to.
Right.
So we have an African American community that's been here. It's the first masjid built in the city. Why are people still coming to this country, setting up their own masajid, their own leadership, their own scholarship, instead of going under the community? So you have these grandiose $1 million chandelier having masajid, while the inner city masjid can't fix its roof because they took their money to the suburb. Had they have come and did what they were supposed to do, then we wouldn't have these issues to begin with. The problem is that they're not practicing their Islam when they first come to this country, meaning that they're not going to the Muslim community here. They came for the dunya in a lot of cases, 90% of the cases, I feel confident in saying. And it shows, because their Islam becomes a show of their dunya instead of an effort for the akhirah. If it was really for the akhirah, they would raise the Muslims that they have disdain for. They would raise the American Muslims up, support and strengthen the American Muslims, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel everywhere they go, so they can have their own. And then they can have the Rabat or the Zawiya or the third space on their, in their community. That's how it should be. Yeah. That's how it should be, So if they're not going to practice that Islam, right, while saying other people aren't practicing Islam, then the next best thing is what you were saying.
Well, I know I'm thinking in terms of practical realities here, but I would agree with you. I do think that they should have, it's the same thing if I were to, as a, white Canadian Muslim convert, if I were to emigrate to, say, for example, Japan, I would defer, to the Japanese converts of that, of Japan, and help them establish their own sub-community and grow Japanese Islam from the ground up. Like
right. That's Islam. That is Islam.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of, and I guess we'll end here because it's 11:38 and I know you got to go. But there's one story that I heard Omar Farouk Abdullah talked about when one of the former Soviet Socialist republics, I think it was Kyrgyzstan, they were allowed to practice their Islam once they broke apart from the Russian Federation, and sisters from that community asked this sheikh from the Arab world, what are we going to wear? We're Russians, but we're not Arabs, but we're Muslims. So what do you suggest that we wear as close to identify as Muslims? I forget if it was Kyrgyzstan or whatever, but the sheikh had a very intelligent response. He said, I don't know what you should wear, but how about this? You tell me what fabrics you like. I will buy you the fabrics, and then you can make the dresses. So, it's a very intelligent response. And, to this day, like when you look at Kyrgyzstan, like they've kept everything about their culture, but they're Muslims. So, it's a very important aspect of Islam.
This is one of the things that it's very important for us to look at women. Mm-hmm. The Muslim world, the women of Mali are not like the women of Morocco. Mm-hmm. And the women of Morocco are not like the women of Sudan, who are not like the women of Lebanon, who are not like the women of we could say Jordan, who are not like the women of Saudi, not like the Iranis. not like the Indians, not like the Chinese, going straight across the world,
Yeah.
right? All of them cover according to the Quran and Sunnah. All of them observe the principles of Islam, but they all have their own flavor. They all have their own cultural identity. And this, I said, we look at the women because you see it expressed in them, whereas the men not so much. But the reality is, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's, since you said we'll end it, I'll end it back to this point, and this is vitally important. You were mentioning something earlier, and it came to my mind. You know, you have one group of Muslims who say the West is shaitan, and I actually wrote a paper about that in college, and alhamdulillah, there's proof of this. But the West follows, the West follows the characteristics of shaitan, meaning that, you know, it invites to fear, it, you know, calls to lewdness, you know, these things. Not saying that the people of the West or that the land itself is shaitan, don't misunderstand me, but what we perceive as being Western is oftentimes satanic behavior, and that's what we're up against. Anyway, back to the point, is that you have this group of people who are calling the West the great shaitan or something like this, and then you have this other side that says, no, if you want to succeed, you have to leave your Islamic identity in the masjid, right? The reality is, again, we are a middle path. Islam is the middle. And so we purify the evil, right? And we take what's beneficial. We take what's good, we leave what's bad. We are supposed to, and I'll just say it again, we're supposed to simply be ourselves, but be the absolute best version of ourselves we can for the sake of God, according to the model of the best of creation, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so, alhamdulillah, this is, if I didn't have any other message for anybody, that's my message. Be the absolute best person that you can be. Be yourself, the absolute best version of you can be, for the sake of God, according to the model of the best of creation, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And that's our message. That's the message.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for being on our very first podcast, Brother William. It was an absolute pleasure having you on. Your book is Message to the White Man in America. I'm glad I got it right this time. And it is available on Amazon. Please, if you're listening to this podcast, please pick up a copy. I'm getting mine soon. I can't wait to read it cover to cover. But I'll let you get back to what you wanted to do. Yeah, this was wonderful. And I'll leave the link on where you can buy the book on the YouTube channel when I do upload it. But yeah, my name is Robert from Islam for Europeans. Assalamu alaikum. If you do have any, please feel free to leave comments in the comment section. Did you have any other closing comments, William, or is that you're going to leave it at that?
Thank you for having me. May Allah reward you. May Allah grant success to this effort. Ameen.
Ameen. Ameen. Thank you so much, Brother William. And we will definitely keep in touch. And signing off. Thank you. And looks like podcast number 1 was a success. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.